Okay, good evening. This is Keisha Rogers, and I want to welcome you to our Monday strategic update. Today is Monday, February 13th. And as many of you saw from our website and may know that we marked two very important anniversaries and events on yesterday on the 12th, which was the birthday anniversary of Abraham Lincoln and the passing into the simultaneity of eternity of Lyndon LaRouche. Both we will characterize, I myself will characterize as two great American statesmen and two truly historic leaders. And we can, hopefully people had a chance to look at, I'll just point it out on our website here, along with a couple of other additional developments. Come back to that in a second. Remembering Lyndon H. LaRouche Jr. And if you haven't had a chance to take a look at that, that is really what we're going to get into tonight with Michael, who will be giving the opening presentation, which will situate this question of the strategic situation and how to understand it with so much going on. What is required in terms of the historic individual acting today as Lyndon LaRouche understood. Before we get into that, and before I turn it over to Michael, I do want to point out a few very important developments on our website. And I will say, if you're not already subscribing to the LaRouche PAC newsletter, if you are not on our email list, please sign up. You can go to our campaigns and sign up to, and also to get active on our website for our updates. And most of you probably received the updates from yesterday by Barbara Boyd, called Sit Rep USA 2/12/2023. And I would encourage everyone to read that. We'll go through some of the details of that report just in the context of this discussion and answer any questions that you have on it. Obviously, we know that just the nation is in total chaos, where you just had this insane lying State of the Union address by the senile president in the White House, occupant Biden, telling all kinds of lies about the state of affair of the economy and how great it is. But at the same time, we know that that's not the case, as Biden and his globalist friends are continuing to push the United States and the world to the brink of World War III, and that this is going on while you have all kinds of just total chaos unleashing. Everybody's probably wondering about UFOs and balloons and everything else. And, I think there's a certain context in which you have to have a thought process and not get too just totally caught up in the everyday news cycle that will make you question everything. But the question is that we have a very firm idea of what must be done in terms of our campaign with LaRouche PAC. Is, first of all, we have to put an end, as we said on a number of occasions, to this insane war drive. And the only person exemplifying leadership on that front is former president, which should be President Donald Trump. And Donald Trump's continued clear focus on putting an end to the Russia-Ukraine war and calling for negotiations and being brought in to help lead those negotiations extremely important. But our role in this is also taking up, our role in this is our campaign, which I want everyone to make sure they go to. We have 3 essential campaigns that we have identified with LaRouche PAC. And this one is most important. All of them are important, but it's front and center right now, which is shutting down the globalist agenda and to to put an end to the Bush-led insanity. The central campaign is to end the Bush-induced stupidity, as you see here. So I would encourage people to take a look at that, and we'll go into more details. Obviously, this is front and center of all of the so-called candidates who are calling themselves qualified in the Republican arena to run for president, and this Bush rhino-led operation that thinks that it will get rid of or put President Trump out of the picture. And so we know we keep hearing things about Nikki Haley or DeSantis, who Trump rightfully today said, you know, DeSanctimonious is basically a non-issue to him. DeSantis is probably going to run for office, and all of these other people. But the question is the role of we, the American people, in identifying true leadership and exemplifying that leadership ourselves is extremely important. The nation is at stake right now. The nation is on the line with the insane policies we're seeing coming out of the Biden collective. And we need leadership that actually has solutions to address the economic crisis. We've seen in the past few weeks, Trump has come out with some very solid campaign statements identifying various policies on energy and border and many other things as he's getting ready to ramp up his campaign rallies and other initiatives. So, but again, I want people to go through this campaign initiative of LaRouche PAC, Know Your Enemy, because we dig deep into the role of the globalist agenda in the Bushes and what's really behind the insanity coming out of the Biden administration. So I will leave that there. And then actually just one more thing that I think is extremely important just to make note of here, and then I'll turn it over to Michael. So I do want to point out a very important interview that was done by Brian Lance and Susan, and I think this was brought up in an earlier discussion this weekend, but I think it's extremely important on addressing the need for physical economy and production in terms of rebuilding our economy, rebuilding the productive economy. And the discussion with Brian Lance and Susan, you can see here America's hidden store of skilled manpower and manufacturing. And I think this is extremely important in the context of the growing debate and growing discussion we've seen around the development of nuclear power. And there are some exciting developments around fusion energy and the United States leading in research and development in fusion energy. And these are the things that are not being talked about on the news in terms of positive developments. And I think it's extremely important that we keep an eye out on that and understand what's happening from that standpoint. So I will turn it over to Michael now. Those are just a few of the updates from the website.
Hey, great. Thanks, Keisha. All right, so I think everybody knows about the splashes in the media, the what we might call the balloonatics, maybe from every angle. Maybe there's now a plethora of balloon launches that are targeting, perhaps they've been there for years. Who knows? But we also know that if the mainstream media, and you can go on any major so-called news website, and the main discussion is the balloons, how much it costs to shoot them down versus how much a balloon costs, what the balloons could do, where the balloons are coming from, are they aliens? When you see this much discussion of something, you have to say, well, from news sources that we know we fundamentally can't trust on critical questions: COVID, the coup against President Trump, the economic crisis, the war in Ukraine. None of these news sites have any have any record of value on any of the major stories dominating the period of time we're living in. So if for them all to be right on this story, obsessively so, would seem a little bit surprising. What I want to do tonight, as Keisha mentioned, on Sunday yesterday, the 12th, was Lincoln's birthday and was the 4th anniversary of Lyndon LaRouche's passing. It struck me over the course of the last week that given where we are, and I think there are 3 dominating characteristics to the kind of crisis we're in. One is, of course, the geopolitical war danger. And if you look at some of the press coverage that's come out, even Stoltenberg, the head of NATO, has admitted, as have others, we have no production capacity in terms of the entire Western Europe and the US, Canada, and so on, ability to produce the weapons necessary, just the artillery for what Ukraine already has. We don't have the industrial capacity to produce enough artillery, ammunition. And they're being outgunned on conservative estimates by Russia in terms of ammunition by over 3 times. That's a conservative estimate. We don't have an industrial base to produce even the low-grade artillery that Ukraine currently has. I mean, some of the HIMARS may not be low grade, but it's certainly not, we're not deploying cruise missiles, we're not deploying the most advanced technology, anything long range. So, and of course, all of Ukraine's, the whole platform, satellite capability, surveillance, and targeting is all done by US space-based platforms. But we clearly don't have a capacity to even wage a limited war using the Ukraine's army as a proxy with Russia from an industrial standpoint. Now, that doesn't mean we couldn't wage a war, and it would be horribly destructive and very likely could go nuclear. So there's no reason to discuss this war has to be stopped. The same is true, and it may be resolved militarily in some ways, but the question isn't what's going to happen there. The question is, what can we do here now to shape that process, and not simply in 2024 with a new presidency, but to force a shift in the sense of presidency and political culture of our country. There's 57 Republicans who voted last year against any funding of Ukraine. That number could possibly go up. But it also requires a clear movement and a clear policy orientation. The same is true on the economy. Imagine that most Americans are going into increasing amounts of debt, not just because of an economic downturn, not just because of COVID. The debt accumulation has been growing largely throughout the past 20 years. Taking on debt, basing one's life on consumer spending, not building up major savings, not necessarily building up a lot of equity in one's home or paying off one's home, but constantly refinancing the mortgage, using that to pay for huge college bills or whatever else people might spend it on. But a constant increase of the levels of personal debt. It wasn't just personal, it was corporate debt. Some of the largest corporations in our country, GE, Boeing, United Airlines, you name it, many of these companies are themselves with such great debt that their profits are difficult to service even the debt interest payments. And it's not just personal and corporate, as we all know, it's also national. That national debt has now over 30 trillion, and the debt service on that is the greatest bill annually we pay as a country. Well, luckily, perhaps not coincidental that the ability for the United States to form a coherent and united nation was the large amounts of debt coming out of the Revolutionary War. And the ability to consolidate that into a new national banking system by Hamilton and by Washington, and Bob Ingram's class on Washington, referenced many times, is essential for looking at Washington's unique participation in this political fight. He wasn't just a guy there holding the fort together. He was advancing major initiatives like this to reorganize the nation's debt towards real development perspectives. The same thing can be done today, but that again takes leadership. It's not merely a collective policy orientation. And we're here to discuss, how do we get to that point? How do we look at a reorganization of this dynamic? And certainly the question of an intelligence perspective. And just 1 second. And then the other component that we're dealing with, which I think are the big strategic aspects, which are taking us down a path where a fundamental shift will occur, or it will be increasingly possible, that the situation of geopolitical tension cannot simply stay where it is. And what's already been exposed over this course of this last year has been an increasing bankruptcy of policy, of industry, and of basic sanity amongst this current Biden neoliberal regime. The same is true on the economy. This debt question didn't arise during COVID, nor did the insanity of public health and the intelligence community or the media. These things have been building up for a long time, and they're not unrelated, nor are they unrelated to the intelligence community's control and surveillance of the population post 9/11 and the climate change cult agenda. How many people today are aware that because of increases of carbon dioxide, we've had historic yields per acre in farming? We've had 15% new vegetation growth on the planet. These are NASA statistics. So the cult premise that somehow human industry, human energy consumption and production and mining are somehow ruining the planet would suggest that actually the inverse is true. The planet is getting totally greener. It's actually getting greener because of human industry, which is a very foreseeable perspective. And at the same time, that may lead to cooler weather. Now, cooler by what measure? How do you measure the temperature of a planet? You know, these things are all still very ambiguous. But nonetheless, we may be going towards, growing ice sheets versus melting. Scientists couldn't say either way. Now, these myths, the myths of the supremacy of this neoliberal regime, what it thought of itself as invincible post-Cold War, is now in shambles. An economy based on massive debt, money printing, and consumption is in shambles. The idea that you can control population with censorship, intimidation, media control is increasingly exposed. It's a real threat. Same with the elections. And then the underlying premise that the dominating economic policy of the country, whether it's the Bushes, the Obamas, the Bidens, the whole clan, for 50, 60 years, that somehow reducing energy and production and industry will solve the problems, have just been obscenely stupid. All of that is quickly coming and unraveling. So Lyndon LaRouche had a unique perspective. And I just want to focus on that tonight, given the anniversaries of both Lincoln and LaRouche. A famous saying back from Illinois in the '86 elections, Lincoln and LaRouche, is something that's a cultural operation that's been deployed as long as these myths, these kind of embedded cultural lies, have become increasingly dominant, which really goes back to the 60s and 70s. And the premise of that lie is that idea of an anti-authoritarian construct of society. that authoritarian, a leading figure in this was, of course, Hannah Arendt with her authoritarian personality, which I don't think really resolves the question. But this is the Frankfurt School. And to a large extent, this was the environment that Lyndon LaRouche built his movement and intervention into this political culture. What do I mean by anti-authoritarian? It means that there are people and individuals, let me put it this way, that there are no ideas, that there are no policies, and that there are no solutions to the problems any society faces on a small local level or on a grand strategic level. There are no policies and ideas to address any of that without an individual representing them. That there are no ideas without the individual. There is no scientific discovery without a particular person making the discovery. There's never been a collective discovery. There's never been a collective decision militarily of great risk that was successful. That it's individuals who take risk. It's individuals who make discoveries. It's individuals who make great discoveries in works of art, in sense of national identity, in poetry and in song. And that concept, that there is an individual that's responsible for those kinds of fundamental changes of a sense of identity, the Shakespeare. It wasn't a cultural milieu of people that wanted Shakespeare, though we've all heard the lie. Was Shakespeare really just one person? Well, why is that the attack? Because wouldn't it be nice if we could undermine the remarkable nature that an individual can have in terms of their conception and of ideas? And shouldn't we then study and make a science out of the qualities of thought, the worldview that those individuals like Shakespeare, Einstein, or Beethoven, or Lincoln might have had? And instead, what we've been kind of swimming in is a very specific British cultural operation. And I call it British because the British developed this with a certain intensity. Yes, they'll come up with certain heroes. They'll come up with celebrities, Hollywood types, and this kind of thing. But none of those people have ever done anything significant or substantial. But what the British developed was a notion of a British liberal philosophy, which in its nature is this neoliberal collective approach. Everything is collective. Everything is bureaucratic. Everything is administrative. We don't develop great teachers. We add more administration, where no one's ultimately accountable or responsible. It was agreed upon in terms of our decisions. It's like collective guilt, collective crime. No one's responsible for mass death if we all accepted that it may happen or would. It's like with COVID. None of us are really responsible. We were all just going along with what everyone said. Were we? There's no individual accountability. And so to make this maybe more personal, for many of you on this call, you may have been alive when John Kennedy was killed. Well, why kill presidents? Why kill Lincoln? Why kill McKinley? Susan Kokinda intervened, I think, on last Monday on a discussion of the assassinations of presidents. Why these individuals? It wasn't the Archduke Franz Ferdinand. It wasn't as if killing him, though he was the heir to the Austrian throne, but it wasn't of the same quality. The presidents of the United States can hold, if they choose to accept it, real responsibilities and power. What was the effect of killing Kennedy? What was the effect of killing his brother and Martin Luther King? On a generation. Let me ask another question with a similar answer. What happens when our civilizations and nations and cultures have been shaped by traditional warfare? That decisive moments have been forced upon us in many times because of bad leadership. But like in the Civil War, as Lincoln fought for real leadership, there emerged people like Grant or Sherman and others. That in a course of war, the people who are capable of taking real courage and responsibility, of making the big, tough decisions, being accountable for them and being successful, shape then the organization of society as a whole. That a crisis creates and forces that people that want to just play by the rules and lose are pushed aside increasingly. And you're looking for people who can achieve the goal of actual success, of long-term survival. And we've not had that. We've had these limited wars we didn't call wars. Vietnam, Iraq I, Iraq II, Afghanistan. Much of this was either British colonial type military deployments, or we became, under Obama, of sponsoring terrorist activity. We never built up a social structure. We worship the special forces, which of course are courageous, brave, and talented young men. But that's a child's hero. That's not a statesman. That's not a person who's taking the crisis of civilization or the national crisis we might face upon his shoulders and effectively deploying large numbers of troops into battle personally to determine the outcome of that conflict. It's a different kind of conception of what military leadership looks like. And the effect of killing great presidents and great leaders in the 1960s had a very clear effect. If you take this responsibility, if you take that kind of leadership, if you challenge the war machine, as King did, as John Kennedy did, as Bobby Kennedy was growing to, you may face your own assassination. So just join the group, play nicely, integrate. And of course, there's nothing wrong with integrating with people socially. I mean, that's a positive psychological effect. But is that necessarily how civilizations advance or even survive? And Lyndon LaRouche identified that there is a specific role of a historical individual, and that this anti-authoritarian culture is this culture also targeting truth itself. Because without individuals willing to put themselves at stake to challenge false myths and to demonstrate their own courage and willingness to take full responsibility, that truth no longer can be viable. If you don't stand on it, if you don't carry the weight, if you don't take the slings and arrows, then it's not demonstrated your devotion to what's true. If it's just collective, well, I'll go if others go. We all go to the same place together, which, as we know, is, you know, the road to hell is paved with good intentions, and everybody has good intentions to work with each other, not offend anybody. And so we all go there together. And so if we all suffer together. But if we're going to survive, the principles of creation itself require something different. And many people recognize that because we all saw the kind of COVID cult. You saw the Russiagate cult, the coup against Trump. You see the green cult, these completely, totally false myths. And the reason I develop these conceptions, and in some sense, what's been lost in our culture, what was lost with the assassination of presidents, what was lost in some sense because, I mean, I'm not asking for a war. What I'm using war as a metaphor for a higher principle of a mission to a nation that's existential, that without a clear, focused mission, like when the Apollo was launched, you pulled engineers who grew up on cow farms, who got a basic engineering degree, and you pulled them into the most difficult engineering challenge in human history, which was to get the Apollo rocket to the moon and then land men safely and bring them back, all of which was almost miraculous that we did it. But it shaped and forced individuals who are ready to take on that responsibility to function. It also provokes an entirely different, you might say, space and time, like a physical space-time, for those people to think in more creative and bold ways, because they're not looking to do gradual incremental changes or improvements the way the PhD class of academics have become today. They've got to accomplish something that's never been done before. You're not going to get there incrementally. You run into Zeno's paradox. Bit by bit, just gets you further and further away. You've got to take leaps and jumps of new discoveries to get to the full accomplished goal. Well, that's true economically, it's true as a national culture, and it's true politically. And we've got to create a movement with that shared sense of mission. And in that sense, people that might be opposed to the war in Ukraine and think that it should be addressed or solved. But did they support President Trump in 2020? Well, if not, why not? What was their strategic failing to think that somehow a continuation of Obama's policies could do anything but lead us to the return to the dangers of nuclear war? That's what Obama was for 8 years, as was the neocons beforehand. And Trump is the only person that demonstrated a willingness to fight against that. Trump's demonstrated a kind of an ability, one with his campaign, but certainly with his presidencies and all of the attacks he's taken, to demonstrate he's ready to lead this fight. And in some sense, you know, my generation and younger especially, we didn't even see the Eisenhowers or Kennedys or Kings what they inspired. We didn't see the space program. We're starting to see things now with Musk and Artemis project, and that's incredibly important, but certainly not comprehensive. It hasn't captured the imagination of the nation the way it did post-Sputnik. We haven't seen an organization of a nation rally around a single mission like the World War II generation did once it realized it was time to fight the war. And there's all kinds of various, history is not black or white on those things, but the effect of mobilizing for that war and fighting it successfully with a mission to end colonialism, to end this kind of 19th century system that it was archaic, cheap slave labor around the world and loss of an absence of national sovereignty. But that had to end. We had to enter into a modern era of sovereign nations. Unfortunately, that didn't last long, but that was leadership. That was Roosevelt's mission. For all of his other failings, his commitment to end colonialism and create a sense of national sovereignty through major industrial advancement was clear, as was Lincoln's. And so my sense is that those of us who are cognizant of this, and I don't think I'm introducing something new to many of you, I'm only making a case that what we have today is to rapidly build a movement, not by the time of the Republican convention in Milwaukee in July of 2024, but now. You change the policy now by rallying around a presidential campaign and movement around President Trump that shifts the policy today, the same way he shifted policy in the Republican Party on austerity, where they literally booed and forced President Biden in his State of the Union to go, I guess we're all on the same page. I guess we all agree. We're not cutting Social Security and Medicare. That you've got the only people to vote against the Ukraine funding and to say we should shut down these forever wars are now is a large caucus in the Republican Party. The Democrats have abandoned it. It's the Obama legacy. And yet some people still want to perch themselves somewhere within the Obama left. And it's a unique cultural question that we are operating against, that there is a steep culture where even a lot of the grassroots people who have been incredibly active since November 3rd, 2020, in the grassroots, fighting for MAGA, fighting for America first, now might say, well, let's see what candidates come out. Maybe Ron DeSantis would be better. Maybe this, maybe that. And we've already exposed DeSantis, DeSanctimonious. He's a Bush creature. He's Bush 4. He's Baby Jeb, whatever you want to call him. But it's a question of, it doesn't have to be about being pro-DeSantis. To undermine the one person who's demonstrated a commitment to truth and the authority and responsibility to take the risks, the slings and arrows, and to fight and be successful in his efforts. There's one person in the last 50 years, except for Lyndon LaRouche's presidential campaigns, the one person that's emerged within the political class, or at least to operate within it with a viable chance to win the presidency, has been President Trump. That has to be fought for now. We can't afford to wait a year and a half to consolidate that. We can't wait for primaries to see how things unfold. We need a movement today around this campaign and around this presidency to do if anything, to challenge the woke culture of anti-authoritarian belief, of fake myths. And you do that by asserting individuals, not just opinions that that's wrong, but that there are individuals who demonstrate the truthfulness of real ideas, not the fake myths. Because it's not a question of a logical argument. It's not about scoring points or getting more Twitter followers to support anti-woke versus woke or banning woke legally. You're not going to get rid of bad ideas by saying legally they're not allowed. You're going to challenge them by actually supporting individuals who demonstrate a capability of changing that. That's an effective military formation in warfare. And I would say we are not dealing with a political election. We are dealing with a people's war, a cultural war, where there's similar kind of leadership and devotion and commitment from the people fighting that towards not just the right ideas, but towards the people that have dedicated and demonstrated a sense of the viability of those ideas in action and in policy. And so I'm asking you to support in all of your discussions and to help us build out a kind of vibrant discussion with anti-war people, with people on the left, with people against the censorship, but don't let them sit in a comfortable liberal spot where they're for free speech, or they're for ending NATO, or they're for against war, or they're for closing the border and national sovereignty, or they're for bringing back manufacturing jobs. They're for policy sets of ideas. A safe, comfortable place. You don't win wars because you believe you should win, or you believe that you have the right ideas if you do win. We win and we demonstrate what's necessary by organizing ourselves effectively around people that are willing to really lead. Lyndon LaRouche did that. He did that for 50 plus years in his presidential campaigns, and he took all the slings and arrows. And the only person that's come close to approximating that kind of devotion and courage has been Donald Trump. That's my case tonight. I'm asking you to organize around that in every sector of life you can find, because it's a challenging conception to a culture, especially for younger people. We never even saw John Kennedy. Maybe I saw in my childhood elements of Reagan. But for most cases, 45, 50 and younger, you grew up with Bush Sr., Clinton, Bush Jr. That's the orientation. No leadership. In Bush Jr.'s case, a system of lies. They say we don't have to argue around truth. Lying is necessary. We've discussed it here before. And so that's what I'm raising. That's what I'm wanting to discuss. At least that's what I think is critical for any citizen today to really break out of this woke culture. It's that question. It's not DeSanctimonious's banning whatever. It's getting out there and fighting for what's necessary and true about human culture. Fission, fusion, the space program, development, but a dialogue to end this kind of forever war, to fundamentally radically change the geopolitical structure, and to relaunch a revival of the American system. Those kinds of fights Trump has shown and proven. We've got to organize around not just those ideas, but the person in this case who's put himself out for the presidency that will fight for them. And if anybody has any strategic clarity, any real sense of actually wanting to change the way our culture works, from censorship to the police state, to the forever wars, to the border, to immigration, to any of it, you've got to fight for the individual. There's a higher principle there in terms of how civilization works that is going to be critical to reviving that principle in the future generations, to awaken within people a sense that creativity, that truth lives in an individual. And that's how you end up with a viable, flourishing economy, businesses, entrepreneurship, and responsibility from the citizens at large. It's not about a collective group. It's about what you can contribute to the course of history. That living principle. So hopefully that's a decent approximation. Keisha, I'll hand it back to you. And looks like we've got somebody jumped into the queue. We can, or maybe you have some thoughts yourself.